So you probably remember your first time flying, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Like that twinge of nervousness that you get, and you're like, oh, like, what if I'm late for my plane? What if it takes off without me? And then there's also the more serious portion where you're like, okay, well, what happens on the plane? Like, what if I get sick and throw up? Or, like what happens if there's like a terrorist attack that happens sometimes, or you know what if the plane crashes? It's these thoughts that just kind of go through your head that happen right before a plane, which honestly doesn't really help, especially if you're an anxious flyer. I
Oh, yeah.
know, yeah. One of my favorite things to do before I get on a plane is actually watch the show Mayday. And it's all about plane crashes and them crashing into oceans and just like horrible, horrible things. And that kind of keeps me up at night before I go and fly on a plane.
I love that.
Yeah, I like being a little bit of a sadist. What can I say? But like, imagine you're like a young 17-year-old you again, and you're just about to climb on to your plane to go see your loved ones for Christmas. Like, this is a big deal. Don't worry, your parents sitting right beside you. Everything's safe. You're looking outside the window seat and you're looking at the wing of the plane, and you can see the big propeller like start to take off. It's a little bit of an older plane. It's not that big fancy Boeing whatever, even though I don't know if you want to be on a Boeing right now. But, window seats are awesome. How else are you going to get your Instagram picture being like, "Okay, taking off." So you're sitting there as the ground slowly turns into squares, like in SimCity, where you can see a farmer's field over here, a forest over here. You're like, wow, the world really is just so small as you're flying above it on your big metal plane. And you watch the sky turn slowly from blue to black. Okay. It's getting a little nervous now, right? Like, no one likes flying inside a storm. We all like it where maybe we don't want to see the ground, but at least where like the clouds are nice and fluffy and there's kind of no danger. But that's not happening on this flight. You can start to feel the plane shake, like
Ooh.
uncontrollably start shaking. And the rain is just pelting the windows. You can't help in the back of your mind but think, okay, like, whew, good thing there's only about 20 minutes left. We're gonna be landing soon. This will all be over. Everything's gonna be okay. Like, this is just a regular flight. It's the day before Christmas. Like, nothing would happen. But the plane continues to shake and it shakes even harder. You grip your parents' hand so hard, you swear you can feel their hand just lose all circulation from how hard you're grabbing onto the hand. And that's when everything starts falling. The parcels, luggage, there were flowers and gifts and Christmas cakes because God forbid someone decided to bring some fruitcake upon the flight, right? But it's all falling down and it's falling out of these cabinets and it's falling onto you. It's a mess. And people are, clambering, they're screaming, they're trying to get their things back up in the containers. But then on the loudspeakers, they're like, "Okay, everyone, stay in your seats." And the flight attendants are desperately trying to get everything back in the cabinets. It's total chaos. And all 92 passengers are, we're all thinking kind of the same thing. Like, okay, like we just got to get down on the ground. Like, I'm never going to fly again. It's going to be okay. And that's when the flight attendant comes back on the speaker. "Passengers, we inform you the area of turbulence we are going over is due to a major storm over the Amazon jungle. Fasten your seatbelts." That was probably the last moment of calm that you can remember on this plane. You were aboard a flight from Lima to Pulacaba, Peru. And that's pretty much the last thing you heard before you felt the sky. You're still strapped to your seat, but you're alone. You're at an altitude of 10,000 feet. You're alone, and you're falling. You're slicing through the sky. You're no longer inside the cabin of the plane. You were
Oh my.
outside in open air. You didn't leave the plane. The plane had left you. Hi, and welcome to Decomposing Flowers podcast. We're excited to have you here with us as we delve into some truly intriguing and occasionally disturbing true crime cases. I'm your host, Kira, and with me is Jen. Everything we say in our podcast are information we've gathered from testimonies, interviews, documents, and trusted sources. Any opinion we say is our own. If we get any information wrong, please feel free to let us know in the comments. We mean no disrespect to the victims or anyone affected by this case. Today, we're going to be discussing Julianne Koopke. I probably mispronounced your name. As you can tell by the opening of this case, it's a little bit different from the regular subject matter that we perhaps cover. It's about her story about how she survived her plane crash. But before we get started, I just wanted to give a quick trigger warning. I will be talking about a little bit of like infected wounds. And some of it has to do with bugs. So if you really don't like that kind of subject matter, or you don't like hearing about body horror, even though it's not technically body horror, it's just a horrific thing that happened to the body, feel free to check out some of our other episodes, and make sure you take care of yourself. Get yourself a bubble tea, enjoy the sun if it's sunny outside, and we'll see you in the next episode. Julianne was going to see her father, who was in the rainforest at the time. She had crash landed in Peru in a jungle ridden with venomous snakes, mosquitoes, and spiders. She was still strapped to her seat, hanging head over heels, as the whisper of the wind was the only noise she could hear, aside from the screaming of her own voice as she plummeted towards the ground. She was free falling out of the plane, still strapped into her seat. Maybe this is lucky, but unlucky. She lost consciousness somewhere in the fall, so she can't remember what actually happened once she landed. She was aboard Lanza Flight 508, December 26, 1971, when it was struck by lightning, which caused her to plummet 10,000 feet to the Amazon rainforest down below. That fateful day, the flight was only meant to be an hour long, but just 25 minutes into the ride, tragedy struck. I think we all watched, maybe this is different for people in different regions, but we've all kind of watched maybe those wilderness shows or those survivalist shows. I know I used to watch a lot of Zaboomafoo and Survivor.
Zaboomafoo. I just
Zaboomafoo? Heck yes, dude. Yeah, like I always thought like I would be like the animal whisperer, the guru. You remember when like the Kraft brothers used to go out into like the wilderness and they'd be like,
oh
"Whoa,
yeah.
look here, and there's a bear and it's totally chill." Like I used to be like, "Okay, I can totally just go out in the wilderness and all of a sudden I'm going to be like the tamer of lions."
Oh yeah. Me.
Or you and I were recently talking about this. There was this show called Man Tracker, and it was about this guy who rode on a horse and he tracked people out in the wilderness. And Jen and I used to be training for Man Tracker.
When we were like what, 11?
Exactly, yep. And yeah, we were like running in the field and we were like, "Oh yeah, no, we can survive in the wilderness right now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
in the
thought we could do
Canadian
it.
Rockies, we got this." Julianne's young kind of life was kind of like living that fantasy. She was the daughter of two zoologists, and she was familiar from the jungle from basically the time when she could walk. She was born in Lima on October 10th in 1954. So her parents were two German zoologists who had actually moved to Peru to study wildlife. And in the 1970s, her father lobbied the government to protect the jungle from clearing and hunting and colonization. So, like, he's like one of the real ones. Her dad, Hans William, was a zoologist, much like her mother, Maria, who was an ornithologist technically. The two
What's that?
met as they were studying in university, and they were seeking a country with kind of like this new age exploration. Like, they wanted to be like Indiana Jones. Like, they wanted to go out there in the wilderness and find the unexplored, but like in a respectful way. Like, they were like, we're not going to burn down the jungle trying to find a new frog, you know? So, yeah, they made their way to Peru and wed in Lima. And they're quoted as saying, yes to a life with the other in Spanish, see? Take that what you will. I don't know what to make of that. Her mother was actually known for her work with birds. She was very well respected in Southern America, and her work is still referenced for today because she made discoveries and scientific names for four Peruvian bird species
Oh,
and a
wow.
lizard species. So like they
Pretty
like went
cool.
out there and they pretty much succeeded on their goals there. But their next goal was to raise their only daughter in a home alive with the animals. Like, they wanted to bring their work inside and
Oh,
just
so it
have
was like
this.
Zoboomafoo.
Sorry, what's that?
So it was just like Zoboomafoo, like
Exactly.
oh my
Exactly
god.
like Zaboomafoo. Like, Steve Irwin, he wishes. And I mean, he probably did. I don't know. But yeah, like they were just like living the life. They had a parrot named Tobias or Bio. He was nicknamed. And a German Shepherd mix named Lobo, which I think is like dog in
Yeah,
something.
yeah, I think it's
Um,
Latin? I don't know.
Me neither, but that just popped in my head. And then like it was crazy. It was like it was just surrounded with birds. Like there were so many kind of wounded birds that Maria, Julianne's mother, found, and they just kind of like took in. So it was like bird crazy house. But they were so dedicated to the jungle. They left to establish Penguana. Hopefully I pronounced that right, which was a research station in the Amazon rainforest. There, Julianne learned how to survive in one of the world's most diverse and unforgiving ecosystems. Like, this was her playground. She was like, this is, yeah, sorry, keep your city and her jungle gym. Like, I'm already in the jungle. She grew up knowing that nothing was really safe, not even the ground that she walked on. And those memories kept her alive time and time again because it taught her how to keep a cool head. Because as you can imagine, if you're walking along and you see a big freaking spider like the size of your fist, and you're like, oh, well, that's a spider, you know? Like, it's pretty chill. Oh, that's the world's most poisonous snake. Or venomous, sorry. Hopefully you're not eating poisonous snakes, but if you do, good for ya. But anyways, so she was traveling with her mom from Lima to Peru to go visit her father, who was working in the rainforest. She actually, the day before, had just received her high school diploma. And the only
Oh,
reason why they were going this day was because she wanted to go to her prom the day
oh,
before. And it was amazing. Like, it was so beautiful. It was everything she ever hoped for. Like, she looked like a beautiful princess, which was exactly what she wanted. And that might, she lived in the whole jungle, and maybe that didn't, happen every day where she got to feel like a pretty princess. So that was a really special, and they were so excited for her next steps because she was going to study zoology just like her parents did. So they were flying out on Christmas Eve on a turboprop airliner that could carry 99 people. And on this day, it was carrying pretty dang close to that, including the crew members. Yeah, it was a few shy of that.
oh wow.
But Julianne's father knew this plane kind of had a terrible reputation. Out of the 170 airplanes that were built of this brand, 58 were written off after they crashed or suffered extreme malfunctions midair.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like you're flying along and all of a sudden it's like, "Oh, sorry, see ya." Like, I don't wanna be a plane anymore. So, like, understandably, he was like, "Hey, guys, can you, like, I don't know, like, maybe, like, take a bus or something else?" 'Cause, like, that's yeah, it's not giving safety. But with Christmas, like, literally tomorrow, they were like, "No way in heck. It's gonna be fine. Like, it's the day like, it's gonna be Christmas soon, guys. Like, we gotta get this done." And so they booked their tickets, and initially, the flight was like no other. They were in the second row from the back. Julianne was sitting by the window seat while her mother sat beside her, and, they got their snacks, their sandwiches, the customary peanuts that I'm so shook they don't give out anymore. Yeah. Now
Wait,
they
why
make
don't
us pay for champagne. Sorry, what did you say?
why don't they give them out anymore? Do you know?
Ah, man, I wish I know. That keeps me up at night.
It's probably peanut allergies, I'm assuming.
Oh, you know what? That does Sorry for everyone who has a peanut allergy. You know what? That does make sense.
Yeah.
Sorry, me and my entitlement. But as they watched the jungle below them slowly turn into blackened clouds, something didn't quite feel right. And especially because they were bouncing up and down in their seats. Shit was flying all over the place. Like it was a tornado inside the cabin.
Oh,
And
wow.
that was when a massive bolt of lightning rocketed into the side of the plane, right on the wing. And, even though they tell us, like, it's okay, planes can get hit by lightning, it's whatever, like, that single bolt of lightning was explosive. And it literally split the plane in half.
Oh my god.
Yeah, it sent everyone hurling downwards towards the jungle below. And beside her, all she heard from her mom is, "That's it. It's the end. It's all over."
Oh my god. That's so sad.
Yeah. Julianne was sitting right beside her mother when the plane suddenly flew into a swirl of pitch black clouds, and glistening rain coated her cheeks as she started to fall through the sky. All she could hear were the people's screams and the noise of the motor, until all she eventually could hear was the wind in her ears. The screams stopped as all was quiet. The weightlessness was hard to describe. Like, we've all kind of had that moment of weightlessness when we're in an elevator and it's like your belly kind of goes like a flip flop. But this was a feeling of vertigo that couldn't be described. Like, she was plunging into an abyss all around her as she rolled uncontrollably, just flip flopping as she turned over and over and over again. She was holding her mother's hand right before everything fell apart, and it unclasped so violently from her hand.
Oh.
She was still clutching, the space where her mother's hand would have occupied.
Oh.
And, she couldn't help but think, I was never going to touch her again. And so she fell 10,000 feet through the air and into the canopy below. The densely packed treetops looked like broccoli heads. And the last thing she could recall was the sound of the trees crashing before she woke up the next morning on the rainforest floor, her sleeveless dress torn and her glasses were missing. Have you ever been to like a lake at the night and heard the croak of trees? Like it's kind of like a cacophony of croaks. And that's all Julianne heard when she woke up, was the call of the frogs and the birds all around her. Like if she was anywhere else, this would feel like home for her. But she was in the mud, and all she could remember was where she was yesterday. How did I get here? She thought. She could recognize the sounds of wildlife, And, she's like, oh, it's that bird. And, oh, you know what? It's that species of frog. Oh my God. My dad just loves talking about this frog. It's so stupid. But how did I get in the jungle? And that's when she realized she just survived the plane crash. She wasn't far from home because the jungle was always her home, right? But
Mm-hmm.
one wrong turn and she would walk so deep into this rainforest, there would be no way out. Like, it's honestly like a labyrinth. As soon as you take one step into the jungle, it's like it closes in around you. It's impossible to orient yourself, really, because there's no sky. There's just the jungle. There wasn't anything that her parents didn't teach her about the jungle, but she somehow had to find the knowledge to keep going in her concussion fogged head. As she looked up in the canopy, her first thought was, I just survived an airplane crash. But her next thought was, where's my mom? And she
Oh.
shouted. She screamed for her mom. But the only reply was the sound of the jungle. The cries of the frogs, the screams of the birds, the howls of the monkeys. But there was no cry from her mom. She was completely and utterly alone in the Amazon rainforest. Like, the most dangerous place, arguably, in the world.
Yeah.
And she wasn't walking away from a plane crash unscathed. Like, she had a concussion, a broken collarbone, and some really kind of deep cuts.
Mm.
Later on, even though she, kept powering through, she had a ruptured ligament in her knee, but somehow she kept walking. The forest really had kind of saved her life, as the foliage cushioned the impact of her 10,000 foot fall. But
Wow.
she wasn't just about to push herself up and start walking out of the jungle. No, she started fading in and out of consciousness over that first day before she was finally able to pull herself to her feet. Like, her whole collarbone was broken. There was no just kind of pushing up from a push up and going up. Like, it was agony to move. She was dizzy and constantly needed to vomit, but the shock was the most horrifying of kind of the initial experience. She could only process basic facts, okay, number 1, here's what I did. I survived a plane crash, okay? Okay, let's see. Number 2, okay, the glasses are gone. Okay, that's a problem. See, she couldn't see very well at really. But one of her eyes had swollen shut, so she couldn't really see out of that one. So,
Oh no.
yeah. Um okay, so number 3, something's broken. And okay, number 4, I have some pretty deep cuts. Like, she had a deep gash on her calf and on her shoulder. Her shoulder didn't seem that bad. Like, it was only about like a centimeter or two. Like, it was like the size of a coin, but it was deep, like
Oh.
deep, deep. And she would fall unconscious again and again and again, and just have to keep reliving that same experience. Okay, number 1, number 2, and okay, I'm back asleep. And like, she wasn't really dressed for survival. She was wearing a very short, sleeveless mini dress and white sandals. She'd lost not only her glasses, but also her shoe. So, what she did was she took off her other shoe and used that to test the ground ahead of her as she walked because she couldn't see where she was stepping.
Oh.
She could have stepped right on to a snake, The snakes kind of, they're smart. It's taken lots of years of evolution, but they look just like dry leaves. I always love finding those, like, where is the animal? Like, you won't believe it. It's like kind of like finding like a natural where's Waldo? And it's always horrifying because it's like, oh God, there's a cougar like right there. Like, what if this
Yeah,
was real? But unfortunately, this was even worse because she couldn't even see them.
that'd be really scary.
Yeah. So her first thought was, okay, get up and go find mom. And so that first day, all she did was search for her mom. But she found no one. There wasn't even any bodies. Like, it was like she just woke up and all of a sudden she was in the jungle. But, she had her seat like kind of close by, and she knew she, didn't just wake up in the jungle from, sleepwalking or something. And what's kind of terrifying? I always say my least favorite animal is kind of ridiculous. I hate monkeys. Hot take, I know. The monkeys are different in the jungle. They're noisy, yeah. Like, I think we've all listened to a howler monkey and gotten goosebumps because they are so loud and so creepy. But monkeys also steal your stuff if you
Oh,
don't tie it down.
and they're smart.
I had this one friend who, I mean, they weren't in like the Amazon jungle, but they were sleeping outside when, they were like, okay, kind of messing around, having some alcohol, whatever. And they were just kind of camping out. And so one of the guys, who was a small guy, he's a little bit smaller. He's not 6 foot. Calm down, ladies. And he decided to wear his backpack to bed. My friend, he woke up and everyone was screaming because this guy was being dragged away by monkeys who had a hold of his pack. He was
Holy
being dragged into the rainforest because the monkeys wanted his backpack so much.
Wait, really? Oh my god.
Yeah.
That's
Like,
well, like, I've seen videos of monkeys where they'll take, like, someone's jacket and just put it on, and it's, like, kinda funny, but also really scary.
yeah. And not to mention they throw poop, so
Yeah.
I mean, so yeah. I mean, for me, that would be like one of my instant, like, oh my God, I'm in the jungle. I'm gonna get attacked by monkeys. Like, rabid monkeys are a thing too.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, for me, I'm like, oh my God, she's stuck with monkeys. But for other
Oh.
people, it can be like snakes, spiders, whatever. At the crash site, she was able to find a bag of lollipops. And so, I mean, some sources say that she ate them all right there or she rationed them. But either way, Julianne was terrified of starving. All she had was 12 lollipops to her name, a shoe as a walking stick, and a dress that was barely holding on to her.
Oh
That
my
was
god.
it. And so the next day, she's like, okay, I need to find a way out of this jungle. So she walked. She picked a direction and just walked. She's like, okay, if I don't find anything in the next 2 hours, I'll turn around and then I'll pick another direction. But luckily, on the way, she found a small well, instantly gulping down any and all water she could find in there. And at this point, she remembered her father's advice to follow the water downstream, as that is where civilization would be. Follow the water. Okay. So she searched and kept her resources going. Like, she was holding onto this bag of lollipops like it was her lifeline. This was all she had. And so she drank from the spring and kept going. And she followed this water for days. A small stream will flow into a bigger one, and then a bigger one, and then a bigger one. And you'll find help, is what she kept repeating to herself. And she did remember, though, that her father warned her piranhas were only dangerous in the shallows. So what she did was she floated in the midstream, hoping and praying that the water would just kind of take her to something. Now, an interesting thing to note about piranhas, they're not man-eating, even
Hmm.
though if you like die in the water, they'll probably scavenge your bodies. They're actually quite chickens. So a little
Interesting.
misconception about piranhas there.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Um, sorry, I'm like piranha lover 69 over here. Like, I love talking about piranhas.
Oh my
Hey.
god.
But so the whole time she's floating in the water, occasionally she'll get out of the water because, leeches. And I'm not sure if it was in this particular area of the Amazon that she was in, but they actually have this kind of parasite worm thing that likes to swim into urethras, I heard.
Oh my god.
Yeah. Yeah. So, like, yeah, maybe you don't want to go into the water, but she was in the water.
Oh.
Um, I just remember watching this from a show called 90 Day Fiance.
Oh my god.
So, anyways, the jungle was still wet though. Like it was in the middle of the wet season, which for the jungle is pretty much all the time. So the whole time she's going along this river, it's raining relentlessly. So everything was soaked. There was no dry logs or anything for her to light a fire. No trees had fruit. She would search and search and search for something to eat, but all she had was her very dwindling and like quickly dwindling source of lollipops. And important to note, the whole time she only has like a short mini dress that's barely hanging on. Like it was cold anytime she went to go to sleep. Pretty much everything that grows in the jungle is also poisonous. So if she didn't know what it was, she wasn't touching it. And it was very, very lonely as she tried to make her way back to what she hoped was civilization. What she wrote in her book was, I was often afraid, but never of the jungle. It wasn't its fault I landed in it, which is
Oh,
honestly so wholesome. The book is called, also, if you want to read it, it's called When I Fell from the Sky. Just a really nice read. So, as she walked or swam, the cut on her arm, this is where it gets a little gross, became infested with maggots.
oh no.
And she really feared that she would lose her arm. She couldn't help but wonder every time she looked down at her arm. And she thought, I wonder how many maggots are in that little hole because there were so many. It was no bigger than a one kind of like a loonie or a euro coin. I don't know what the states have for coins, but it wasn't bigger than a quarter pretty much. And it would have been fine if these were maggots because like okay, something you might not know about maggots is even though, yeah, sometimes it's potentially problematic to have maggots, maggots only eat dead flesh. Um
Oh,
so uh yes, it would have been kind of gross if she had maggots in her arm, right? But they're
yeah.
only eating dead flesh. Like they'll never eat good flesh. And yeah, they'll sometimes like poop in the wound, which is obviously not good. But in hospitals, actually, sometimes they use maggots for very specific procedures to make sure the wound is sterile.
Interesting.
Hmm.
It's like
But
little fun facts.
little fun fact, yeah. But what was in her arm wasn't maggots. It was actually botflies,
Oh my
botfly
god.
larvae. So all of that stuff about eating dead flesh and not being problematic, oh no, these were very problematic. Yeah, I accidentally looked up botfly larvae infestation,
Oh
and if you have
no.
tryptophobia, please God,
I
don't look it up.
Yeah, I think I've seen that.
Oh, it's awful. It's so gross. And like it just oh ugh, there was so many, yeah. Just don't look it up. I have tryptophobia and I am scarred. But it was so hot during the day and wet and it rained several times a day. But at night it was so cold and it was so hard to be alone because all you could think about was, okay, what's there? I wonder what that sound is. Eventually, the stream opened up to a river. She was hopeful that someone would be there, but she was so angry and despaired because there wasn't a single person in sight.
That would be really scary.
Yeah,
Like,
like
just
all
the
this,
isolation.
yeah, all this effort, like 4 days, 5 days, and you barely have had anything to eat, barely had anything to sleep, and no one's there to save you.
And she doesn't even know if her mom is alive or not. Like,
Yeah. And so I watched an episode of a little show called Naked and Afraid to kind of get more of an idea. And I mean, reality TV show, right? And so I watched an episode and it made my skin crawl. There was a girl on the show who was getting, okay, so Naked and Afraid. Let me get into that before I get into this. Oops, sorry. So basically, it's a show where these people are dropped off into extreme um, kind of circumstances. So like they're like stranded on an island or they're stranded in the desert or they're stranded in the rainforest and they're naked and that's all they have.
Oh my god.
So there was a girl on the show and she was getting absolutely annihilated by bugs in the rainforest, and she was having an allergic reaction to them, and it made her whole skin kind of flare up and itch, and it was so bad and it burned, and she was covered literally from head to toe in these bug bites.
Oh,
And
that'd be nasty.
oh, it was so gross. And she said after the show, it took months for her to heal, like 8, 9, 10 months for her to heal.
Wow.
And, in other episodes, people are regularly getting bitten by bugs, spiders, ants, whatever. And if they aren't being bitten, they're being crawled all over by gigantic cockroaches and spiders and having to deal with snakes. And, nothing's dry in the jungle. And there's so many bugs, they'll scratch you. And if you scratch it, you get it infected. And basically, it's game over. Dying of exposure in the jungle is so much more different than dying of exposure in Antarctica. Dying of exposure can also mean from bug bites.
Oh, I never even thought of that.
Yeah. Like it doesn't get good. So on the fourth day, she heard the noise of a vulture, a king vulture, which they have there. And she was afraid because she knew they only land where there's a lot of carrion or like decay, corpses basically. And so she knew that there was going to be some bodies from the crash there. And as she came across the corner and the trees just kind of cleared up, she saw 3 passengers still strapped to their seats. They landed headfirst into the ground with such force that they were buried like 3 feet deep, with their legs still sticking straight up into the air.
Wow.
Yeah. She was frozen in fear. That was the first time she had ever seen a dead body, let alone something so traumatic and horrific. And one of them was a woman. Instantly, she thought about her mother. And even though she was scared, she was petrified even as she came close with it and touched some of the corpses with a stick just to make sure, like, okay, they're gone. Okay. And she looked at the toenails and saw that they were painted pink. But luckily, her mother never polished her nails. She felt immediately relieved and ashamed as she thought, okay, it's not my mom, thank God. And some sources say among these passengers, she found a bag of sweets, which would serve as her new food source. Needless to say, avoiding insect bites in the Amazon is a difficult task at best times. But some nights were particularly difficult, as, suffering from numerous bug bites and mosquito bites, she was rarely able to sleep and quickly becoming weaker and weaker by the day. She was able to see rescue planes and helicopters above, and she shook and she screamed and she yelled with all her might and all her strength. But they were looking into a jungle, and she was looking up at them. There was no way they were going to see her. There was no way she was able to light a fire to make sure that they would know that she was there. All her attempts to call for help were unsuccessful. This plane crash had actually been the biggest search in Peru's history, but due to the density of the forest, the aircraft couldn't spot the wreckage from above, let alone a single person.
No.
So, after what felt like an eternity, but it was just days, Julianne couldn't hear them anymore, and she knew that they'd given up. And it was truly all herself, all on her own, to try to find some help. She was starving and weak and sunburned. So sunburned. Under the beating sun, she suffered intense 2nd-degree burns, which broke and blistered her skin. The ice cold drops of rain soaked her through her thin summer dress, and the wind shivered her right to her core. On bleak nights, she would cower underneath a tree or a bush and feel utterly abandoned. With every day that passed, she consumed a little bit more of the pack of sweets, becoming weaker. By the 10th day, she could barely stand. She kind of drifted along the edge of the river, and she never felt so lonely. It was like she was in a parallel universe, and no matter how loud she screamed, no one would ever hear her. She felt like she was hallucinating when she saw a really big boat. And when she touched it, she realized it was real. It was like adrenaline shot right into her heart. Oh my God. People have been here. There's people around here. They've been here. People are real. They're going to find me. It was then she saw a small path into the jungle. She followed it, barely able to walk. There, she found a hut with a palm tree roof, a motor, and a liter of gasoline. She had the wound on her right arm. It was infested with the botflies. She remembered their dog, Lobo, had an infection, which also became infected with maggots, and her father poured kerosene on it. So she sucked gasoline out and poured it onto her wound. The pain was so intense, she almost blacked out as the maggots tried to bury further into her wound. She pulled out about 30 maggots, and she was so proud of herself. It was really hard to try to keep count, but the counting was the only thing that kept her conscious. With little to no other options, she decided to just spend the night there. Side note, the botfly larvae really did retreat into the tissue so deep. It makes extraction really difficult without tools just because of the way the botfly larvae are. The next day, she awoke to hearing the voices of men outside. She said it was like hearing the voice of angels. After surviving 10 days alone in the jungle, she used all her strength to climb up to this little hut and follow the trail, which did take her hours to get to this little shack. As she laid there for hours, watching frogs go about their business in the trees, she watched them with her empty stomach, and if she had the strength, she would have eaten them. But she couldn't move. She later discovered these were poison dart frogs, and if she had made them her dinner, she would have certainly died. So these three men approached her in the morning. They were Peruvian loggers, and as she saw the first man enter the hut, she thought they were gods. The men didn't feel the same way, though. They were terrified by her. And they first thought she was a water spirit, which is called Yaman Bots. Yaman Bots. I might have not pronounced that right. And when they saw her, they almost turned tail and started running. Yamanjal But is some kind of water goddess, which is a figure from their local legend, which is kind of like a hybrid of like a water dolphin and a blonde, white skinned woman. Like they were like, oh my god, run. But she introduced herself in Spanish and explained what had happened. She said, "My name is Julianne. I survived a plane crash. Please help." They treated her wounds and gave her something to eat, and then the very next day, they took her back to civilization. After 11 days in the jungle, she was saved. After being treated for her injuries, she was reunited with her father. He could barely talk, and in that first moment, they just held each other.
Oh,
For the next few days, he frantically searched for her mother, and on January 12th, they found her. Her mother survived the initial fall, but days later, she succumbed to her injuries. She was so badly injured, she couldn't move. It was several days that she was alive, and Julianne still dreads to think what her last days were like. Maria left a warm and vivid picture of life and touched the hearts of many who visited the biological station. Foreign scientists would lodge there for a modest fee, like they're in the middle of the jungle. And they would be provided with a room in which they could dump their gear and a comfortable bed to be slept in, and innumerable opportunities to talk about biology with the two. You could almost feel the love pouring off of them, Maria and Julianne's father. Casa Humboldt, it was called, was the focal point for ornithologists, bird scientists who were doing field work in Peru. They would have intense meetings about all their work that they were doing over a cup of hot tea and German pastries. And they can only describe like these heated, passionate exchanges as their conversations were mixture of German and Spanish and Latin names of other birds and creatures. And it was just crazy hearing these people talk to each other. They would describe in the evenings, Maria's normally pale cheeks would become rosy and her eyes would be aglow with excitement. After an entire evening of these discussions, the tourists would say they would go to their beds and their heads would just be spinning with ideas as they crawled under the sheets in the cool, moist atmosphere of the jungle. They'd be exhausted, but eager to go into the field as soon as possible because Maria was that passionate about her work. Julianne went on to help authorities locate the plane, so she went back into the jungle. And over the course of a few days, they were able to find and identify the corpses of the 92 people aboard. Julianne was the only survivor. Following the traumatic crash, life was very challenging for Julianne. She became a media spectacle and was not always portrayed in a sensitive light. She developed a fear of flying, and for years, she had reoccurring nightmares. Not only that, but the press was absolutely freaking relentless. Like, she refused to talk to them for years and years and years. It was only in like the 2000s that she started talking about her experience. The cause of the crash was officially listed as an intentional decision by the airline to send the plane into the hazardous weather conditions.
Wow.
And the aircraft, Julianne later learned, was made up entirely of spare parts from other planes.
That's insane.
Yeah. Now, as a biologist, she sees the world as her parents did. In her mind, the plane seat spun with the grace of a seed of a maple leaf, which twirled like a tiny helicopter moving through the air with remarkable grace. And she says that the forces of nature are too great for any living thing to overcome. But sometimes, very, very rarely, fate favors a tiny creature like herself. An upward draft, like the benevolent canopy leaves and pure luck, can conspire to deliver a girl safely back to the earth like a maple seed. And she grew up to be absolutely renowned for her study of bats. um, she still runs Panaguana, her family's legacy that proudly stands in the forest. The jungle is a part of her as much as her love for her now husband and the music of the people who live in the Amazon and the scars that remain from the plane crash, she says. Despite overcoming the trauma of the event, there's one question that always lingered with her. Why was she the only survivor? Julianne said the question continues to haunt her, and it always will, she said. And that was the case of Julianne, the girl who survived falling 10,000 feet from the air. What are your
That
thoughts? Let us know. And thank you so much for listening. Hope to see you again in the next episode.